my travels, I have the opportunity to talk to some really smart people. And today's video is a video I shot while we were at our peer groups in Arizona. And today's video is from Ann Hall. Ann is the owner and founder of IT Agree, and she has lots of really cool things to talk about as it relates to using your contracts wisely in your business to stop revenue leakage and make sure that you're not having a single proposal be your de facto contract overall. So that's what today's video is all about.
As you heard, I'm Ann Hall. We're going to be talking about contracts essentially, but really about managing your risk and increasing your revenue and the reality of all of this and how what you're doing relates into what you're agreeing with your customers. So, you know, MSPs are providing amazing services, but often with that, there's a lot of risk without necessarily knowing a way of being able to manage that day-to-day risk. Okay, so these are things we're going to be talking about. Very happy, given the small size of the group, if you want to raise any questions or discussion points on particular scenarios, just go ahead. Okay, so we're talking about what's ahead for 2026. Your services, changes there potentially. If there are not changes in your services, a lot of what I'm going to talk about is still highly relevant for you. Changes to your customers, what they want and need, and changes to your role potentially, especially if you're moving into AI solutions. And as you've heard, you know, PAX 8 say, that allows you to step into a stronger relationship with your customer, as indeed it does, because there's a whole lot more that you need to understand about their business. Now, underpinning this, as I said, is all your everyday risks, often not necessarily associated with how the contract helps you, but that's what I would like to turn your minds to and help you to recognise. And indeed your profitability, again, not necessarily linked to what's in your legal contract, but again, I want to illustrate to you how that works. So, change impacts what's needed in your agreements. Sounds like a simple statement, but we hear a lot of MSPs saying, well, I've had the same contract for 5 years or 10 years, I've never had a problem, therefore it must be fine. And a simple question to that is, have your services changed in that time? And absolutely, of course, they have. In fact, they're changing all the time, right? So think about that in terms of your contract being what you're agreeing with your customer. When what you're providing changes, your contracts need to change too. Okay? Now, of course, we allow for flexibility in the contract. So if you're switching out, you know, the endpoint protection type that you're providing, if it's the same level of security, then you don't need to change your contract as such, but your contract needs to allow for that. I want to talk a little bit, in fact, that first bullet point I could probably do a whole session on, but I won't. It's just one bullet point. Proposals, quotes, and legal agreements. So all and a mixture of these things together can and do form your contract. So some MSPs will say, well, we don't use contracts. You absolutely still have contracts. Don't ignore that fact. You're providing services, you have a contract, okay? So even if you've got nothing in writing, you'll still have a contract if you are offering services and those services being accepted by your customers. In the case of contracts that are not written, you have no control then over what's actually being agreed, apart from, you know, your recognition of what you've said and what they've said, which is not going to stand up. Proposals also form a contract. So if you're sending out a proposal, or can form a contract, if you're sending out a proposal, your customer accepts that proposal and then you go ahead, that proposal is going to be your contract. A lot of proposals have some salesy content in them, some, shall we say, promises, as well as your pricing, but they don't tend to, I've not seen one yet, that would really equate to what you need in a legal contract. A better approach is to have a shorter form proposal, which is subject to your legal agreement, which then forms your contract, and the proposal drops away. Your quotes also can form a contract. So if you're just sending out a quote and they're accepting it, that is your contract. Does that make sense to everybody? So it's not that a contract is only if you're holding someone to a 12-month term, or you've got 36 months rolling and that sort of thing. Again, we hear people saying, well, I don't want to have a contract because I don't hold my clients to anything. If they want to leave, they can. You still have a contract, even if it's month to month, which I'm sure you understand is not necessarily desirable. You've still got a contract. Okay, so take control of what's in that contract, because that is where you're going to define your service, get a lot of clarity and a lot of protection. One generic agreement no longer works. So some people, a lot of MSPs actually, will rely on one form of agreement, and they want it to cover everything. Think about the services you're providing. You've got managed services, you're reselling 365, you might have a separate standalone cybersecurity service, you're doing projects, maybe you're providing internet connectivity, reselling that, maybe some VoIP. These are all hugely different. When you start to put boundaries around each of those with different types of contracts, it helps your customer to understand, we've got that service, we've got that service, we've got that service. Blend it all together, your customer really is just looking to you and saying, you're responsible for everything. So you're almost encouraging them to think that way. Your services are complex and they're also business critical. Think about that from the customer's perspective, and we hear this again, customers that you've had for a long, long time, and you're now going to put a more formal contract in place with them. How are they going to feel about that? They should actually feel good. Your service is critical to their operation. So why would they want to have a proposal as forming the basis of that contract? In fact, aside from them feeling a lot more comfortable, it's probably what their insurance requires and probably what your insurance requires as well. So don't be nervous about putting contracts in front of customers. The way to position it is it's greater transparency, it's greater clarity on your service, it's better for both of you. You're not trying to beat them up with it. So as I mentioned earlier, change means your contracts need to change too. If you're not using solid contracts right now is a good time to recognise that and to do something about it. But certainly as changes occur, think about that. Do we need to change our contract? Do we need to do something different? Was there an issue that came up, or are there issues that are coming up with your customers that should be addressed in your contract? It doesn't mean you want to change your contracts all the time, not at all. In fact, they should build in that flexibility. But there are times when change is needed. I'm talking about change here in terms of customers, services, and your role. Of course, there's another area of change, and that is the law. The law changes as well. We're not seeing any significant legislative change for MSPs right now for this year, but of course we keep on top of that. So your services, and I'm focusing here on cybersecurity and AI solutions. Your services will extend far beyond that. And if you're bringing in other types of services, think about what type of contract you need to cover that new service. We have people come in and say, well, I'm now doing a specific managed firewall service. What do I need for that? I'm now doing vCISO work. I'm now doing AI solutions, providing AI solutions. So all of these additional types of services, think of the boundaries around each one and think about what type of contract you're going to need. The same applies for everything you're doing right now, by the way. Defining your managed service. Now, the grey areas, the things that you probably understand as being part of your managed service, your customer may or may not understand that, that's a grey area. That grey area costs you. The MSP tends to step in to cover that to keep the customer happy. If you can define that nice and clearly, then your team also has the confidence of knowing what's in scope, what's out of scope. Your customer knows a lot better than they do now. And all that results in greater revenue, greater profitability. Backup, I'm selecting as a topic here. It's not sufficient to put in your description backup. What data is being backed up? On what basis? It's going to have an underpinning of a third-party product. Is that a product that you're reselling? Is it a product that you're using yourselves to provide the service, as some vendors' terms determine and require? Okay. We had an MSP asking us recently, why do I need this detail about backup? And it's exactly those sorts of issues. What data is being backed up? The customer will think all of their data is being backed up, whereas it's just their 365. They might have data in other places, on their devices, on their servers. So be very clear about what's being backed up and the basis on which it's being backed up. MSPs are quite prone to bringing in vendors' descriptions of products. It's an easy thing to do, right? But it's also potentially a dangerous thing to do. We've seen MSPs bringing in this description for backup: a secure, reliable backup of all your critical data. So many of those words could get you in trouble, right? So look out for those descriptions and actually be a little bit analytical. What does that mean? What would the customer think that means? Cybersecurity, again, what is your commitment? And for your managed service, where you've got your monthly charges set, it should cover what's reasonably within your control. So think about that in terms of the cybersecurity commitment and also the product underpinning the cybersecurity service that you're providing. Other factors. It never ceases to amaze me how many MSPs do not increase their prices, don't have a process for increasing their prices. So if you leave your price the same for 5 years, it's going to make it much harder to implement an increase. But if you've got a routine process for implementing increases, that's much easier. And think about other types of things, vendor pricing, that can impact your price and when and how you can increase your price accordingly. NCE is a whole nother ball game. We tend to recommend that you have that outside of your managed service. Most MSPs still do. If you want to have it in your managed service, that's all fine as well, but it needs to be catered for in terms of the commitment that's being made and the endpoints, which can be unaligned, shall we say. And if your 365 commitment goes out beyond the term of the managed service term, make sure that's taken into account. We've had one MSP recently, an American one, who said, can you help us get paid on time? What do we need to put in our contract to get paid on time? Now, that's a good question. It's not just about, getting paid, like why are they not getting paid on time? It turns out in their description, they had 2 lines for what was included in their managed service. Everything was going smoothly. The customer's like, well, I'm in no rush to pay you, there's no problem. And you're only doing a couple of things, why am I paying so much? So it actually helps to be a little bit transparent without giving away, your whole list. It doesn't need to be all your vendors so they can shop that around, but enough detail that the customer recognises you guys are actually doing a lot for us. And then the payment becomes a lot easier. They're recognising the value. So you've got to show the value. Cybersecurity, baseline security position. You want that to be strong. You don't want to be offering solutions that you don't recommend. If you've got your good, better, best, and the security baseline position in your good is really not that good, maybe consider dropping that plan, because you need to be comfortable with your baseline security position and bearing in mind that you're the trusted advisor. Is this what you advise? If it's not, then I would suggest don't offer it. Require your customers to meet that baseline security position and commit to that with you, and understand that that's a requirement for their benefit. Otherwise, they'll just cause you a lot of problems. You know, that same sort of customer will be picking and choosing from other recommendations you make. So in terms of recommendations, it's about actually leveling up the relationship so that actually they are trusting your recommendations, getting that right, reflecting that in your contract so that, it's not your responsibility if they don't take up your recommendation, but at the same time, drawing that to their attention. So if they're delaying a project that needs to be done, put that in writing to them, share out what the impact of that is, and, in some cases, MSPs will want to have that signed. That can then have the effect of the customer changing their mind and saying, well, perhaps we should go ahead with that if you're actually laying out the risk. The product dependence I've touched on already. We had an MSP who'd put the firewall into their plan. Customer had an incident, and they came to us after this had happened and said, what could we have done about that? We spent 11 hours of remediation work. The customer didn't want to pay for it because they're paying for the managed service. They thought we shouldn't have had the problem, and we're certainly not paying for the remediation. Now, the vendor's contract in that instance said they gave no representation, warranty, or indemnity that the product, a firewall, would detect, identify, or disable anything harmful. Now, that's not unusual, to be honest. And, if you want to empathise with the vendor's position, they don't know how that's going to be used. There's a lot of different factors. But bearing in mind that that's what the vendors are saying, you don't want to take on the responsibility yourselves of promising security. In fact, you can't. But that recognition needs to be there that the security position that you are providing is based on a product which you are reselling to them. The choice of products, as I mentioned earlier, you don't need to be locking into particular vendors and particular versions and what have you in your managed services agreement. In fact, that's often going to be too rigid, but you need to allow for the flexibility there. So when I say change your contracts, there are certain things that need to have that flexibility because that's life as an MSP, and it's about recognising those things and making sure you've got flexibility in the right places so you don't have to get your contract re-signed, but that you can change things in those particular areas as the agreement progresses. Here we have a meal of steak and fries. Now this I've put up because the restaurant and the name there, L'Entrecôte, is a restaurant in London. And I was in London for a few weeks last year, and I was intrigued because outside of the door of this restaurant, when it opened at 5:30, was already a queue. And the queue stayed all night. It was an area with lots of restaurants. No other restaurants had a queue. So what were they doing that the other restaurants were not doing? I got more and more intrigued. It turned out their menu had one item on it: a steak frite. Before that, you got a salad, and after that, you got a choice of 2 or 3 desserts. But you came to that restaurant, and that's your dinner. Think about that from the business perspective. The chefs, the ordering of the ingredients, the waiters, the whole process, shall we say, of ordering, preparing, providing that meal. Now think about that in terms of your managed services and typically the long range of services that a lot of MSPs have and the training required for your teams. If you can simplify things, you can become a lot more profitable. I'm sure you hear about this in your peer groups, but that also needs to be reflected in the way that you agree and the way that you enter into contracts with your customers. Sometimes we do an analysis with MSPs. Once they have their agreements ready, which agreements shall I use for which services? It'll turn out in those instances that they have, for their managed services, Plan A, Plan B, Plan C, Plan D, Plan E, lots of iterations and differences that they're, shall we say, allowing the customers to pick and choose from without really taking that trusted advisor and saying, this is what we provide. It keeps it so much simpler. Now, from a contractual perspective, it's much simpler as well. You're maintaining the same contract across the board. One MSP I met with just last week, and often when we meet with MSPs, it'll be, yes, well, they're an MSP. What kind of percentage of your customers are on your managed services? 50, 60, 70? Last week I met one, they had 49 out of 50 customers on the same managed services plan. So yes, I did applaud them. It's fantastic and so much easier. Hard to do, but then easier to do once that's set up, okay? And think about that from your recommendations, your status as trusted advisor. This is what I'm selling. This is how we're going to help you. This is what we're best at. This is what you need. Your customers' expectations. Now, your customers' expectations often go far beyond what you're providing or what you intend to provide. I'm going to talk to you here about this middle item, the barrier of expertise. I think as time goes on and AI solutions become more prolific and customers self-helping and self-serving on those, they're looking to you for different things. But this aspect remains true. There's a massive barrier of expertise between you and your customers. Your skills, experience and expertise way up here, your customers way down here. It's helpful if you help to bridge that gap. They're never going to understand at your level, but you can help them understand in their own way. So that happens by the way that you communicate with your customers and indeed how you use your contracts. As I said, if you're using different types of contracts, here's your managed service. That's outside of scope. This is your project, even if it's for 4 hours or 2 days or whatever it is. Separate that for them. Help them understand that you're not responsible for everything. You're responsible for delivering the services that you have committed to deliver. Now, that also has the nice benefit of showing the upsells. You've got this, you've got that, you've got that. We can also do this for you. If it's all blended, it's very hard for the customer to understand what's what. And your contracts, really should be agreement documents that you understand, not legal mystique. You understand them, your customers get them and understand them. I'll just go on to this next slide, but I want to say, e-signature's great, and of course that's the way things are done now. Your salespeople might be racing to get something closed and signed because, that's closure and commission for them. But how is the customer left in terms of understanding your service commitment? The best scenarios that we've seen is an MSP who actually talks through the service, talks through the contract actually spelling out the service, and the customer then understanding that in their own way and have the opportunity to answer questions. If you're just sending something out and asking them to sign it and they don't read it, that might be fast, but it's not helpful. And we've seen MSPs certainly being able to increase their revenue as a result of taking that extra little bit of time. This MSP here, they said, we only have problems once the contract is signed. Getting the contract signed is no problem at all. But after the contract is signed, that's when the problems start happening again. Our techs, our engineers, handling out of scope tickets at no additional charge. That MSP, a US one, they'd just had a 30,000 Azure invoice disputed when we met them. And so, you know, the nice recurring revenue getting chipped away at, and then something like that coming in, you know, I mean, it's really a case of revenue leakage. And I'll talk to you a little bit more about revenue leakage shortly. You're partnering. It's often said you're partnering with your customers. Partnering is actually a two-way thing. It's not a one-way thing. You need your customers to be engaged in the process as well and to do their part. Their part is not just sitting back and paying you. They have to be engaged. They need to understand their obligations and what's going to be required of them to make for a successful partnering. Help them understand that and make sure they're committing to it as well, taking up your recommendations when they're reasonable recommendations, and of course, I'm sure they are. It's not a one-way street. And things like projects. You're all set to do a project, there's some delay by the customer, whether they've got another priority or they haven't quite done their part ready for that project to be carried out. That has a cost impact on you. So don't just put up with delays and accept them, you know. Think about that as well. The final point in bold there, the customer's risk is not your risk. And I was talking to someone about this yesterday. Customers are in business dependent on technology. Simple as that, they have risk. They have a risk as a result of that, a lot of risk. You come in to support them and to help mitigate that risk. It's not that you should be taking on all of their risk. So think about that in terms of the revenue that you're generating from your customers, the risk exposure that is reasonable in that regard, and what your customers understand when they work with you. It's not great, you're now responsible for everything. It's you are there supporting them with their risk. Moving on to this aspect around trusted advisors, as you all are now, and being able to step into that strategic partnering. The reason that is framed like that is because if you're moving into AI solutions, you need to be much closer with your customers. You need to understand more about their business processes. And it reminds me back to, you know, right in the 90s when I was an IT lawyer. I began as an IT lawyer early 90s, showing my age. But a lot of that in software development and big integration projects of millions of dollars. And, you know, they're very much going in to do, as the teams would go in and do their discovery phases, they have to understand how the business works to be able to put in these big solutions. And it's that activity that you all need to get involved with if you're going to step into AI solutions. If you're just reselling AI products, fine. There's a little bit more that you need to understand about how that's going to work, of course, from a technical, but also from a commercial and legal perspective. But if you're doing more than that, it's going to bring in new activities for you. So, new types of commercial models. If you think about the MSP as it is now, you take it as a given that you're going to be charging on a per user basis or a per device basis or a per server or a combination. But that model had to be built. Prior to that, of course, there was time and material support, break fix support, where people are charging their time and getting paid. Moving on to the MSP model. Now, moving into the AI solutions, what are the models that need to be in place? And some of that is determined by the various activities that you're going to be involved in and which activities you might partner with another provider in order to supply. Now, partnering is a big topic in itself. Partnering back in 2017, when I started coming to the US, and Gabriela Schuster, who some of you might recall from Microsoft, was in charge of partners globally. And I remember her saying to everyone, differentiate to stand out, partner to grow. And actually back in New Zealand at the time, as a result of those discussions, I ran some sessions for Microsoft partners around partnering in different models. And it's not, that partnering is one thing. So if you think about, let's say, the discovery part of an AI solution, we're going into a business to learn the processes. If you're going to partner with somebody to do that, think about that from a diagram perspective. You've got your customer, you've got you there, there's a contract. You're dependent on somebody else to do that discovery process, that scoping. So you need that contract with your supplier. But the two contracts need to talk to each other. Don't go committing to one without the other. So get them lined up if you're going to do it like that. At the end of the day, it's your responsibility to the customer if you're going to structure your partnering like that. You might choose to bring in somebody as a referral partner. So you've got the relationship with the customer and you bring them in for certain parts of the work with their own direct contract. You can still benefit from the referral relationship. So there's different ways of structuring things, different ways of partnering, different risk models involved in all of that. The IP and licensing, two separate aspects. One around the ownership and or licensing of the agents, the solutions. Another around the data inputs and outputs. So typically MSPs don't have to think about intellectual property ownership or licensing too much. Of course, a lot of what you're doing is reselling licenses, but you don't have to think about, the basis on which you're reselling Microsoft 365. That's what the Microsoft customer agreement is sitting there as a direct contract between Microsoft and the customer. But if you're getting involved in taking AI agents, figuring out processes, doing the low-code development, creating your own agents, now all of a sudden, who owns the intellectual property? On what basis are you going to provide that and license it out, whether to your own customers or through, for example, the agent marketplace with Pax8? You're now in a different mode doing that sort of activity. And the data inputs and outputs, being aware of the ownership of the inputs and likewise the ownership of the outputs, or ownership or basis of supply of the outputs. Some of the AI tools are saying we're going to license that back to you as the customer. Even though you're putting in your own inputs, it might be licensed back. So it's something very much to be aware of. And I use the word awareness. Educate yourselves on those sorts of issues or find out more about that if you're going to get involved in those solutions. We've heard all about managed intelligence providers from Pax8 in the last few Beyonds, and they've done a brilliant job of putting together reports and, educating everyone on how this is going to work. This process here makes sense. So you have the discovery session, you find out the workflows. Where are the repeatable workflows? So coming into a customer and offering this as a first step makes sense. On what basis are you going to do that? Think about your contract for that. What are you agreeing to do? What's going to be the outcome of that work? Leading into the selling mode. And the selling mode here is around the pricing models. So the basis on which you do that first phase might give rise to, well, here is a proof of concept piece that we could do for you to illustrate how this could work for one little process. That will give the customer confidence around how things are going to work. That's part of the commercial model. Another part of the pricing is potentially moving into outcome-based pricing. Again, harking back to my earlier days with the big projects, one contract I advised on at that time was a bank replacing its core banking system. So a solution worth tens of millions of dollars. The client I worked for was the bank. So I was meeting regularly with the CIO. He said at the outset, We don't want a new core banking system. We want what it will do for the bank. And these are our 3 criteria. So think about that. No one takes software or uses any technology because, hey, that looks nice and shiny and good. They want the outcome from it. Now, in that case, we built the outcomes into the contract. I've seen that a few times over the years for systems integration work. I've never seen it with an MSP, maybe not so applicable, but certainly with AI solutions. If you can say to a customer, this room of people doing administrative jobs, you could deploy them in other roles, re-educate them, move them into other parts of the business. We can take 70 to 80% of that work and use AI agents and AI workforce potentially to do this work. Now that's where the proof of concept is helpful, because the customer's potentially going to be a little nervous, even though that's what they want to do. Show them how it works for a piece. Okay? So this outcome base would say your cost for all these people is going to shrink. And if you were going to put that forward as a proposition to your customer, you need to put some very strong protections around that, because you're going to have conditions, limitations, etc., assumptions. And all of those being true, if you frame that up appropriately, that outcome can be achieved. And that's what you're selling to the customer. Very nice for the customer. If you could do this, if you do this, it would make you stand out a lot. I'm not saying it's easy to do, but it can be very, very appealing for customers. The buy is the procure and deploy. So buying what you need for the solution and implementing it. The build is creating new agents, which you may or may not choose to do. Maybe over time, we'll see more MSPs moving into the MIP space and getting involved in that activity. And the manage, of course, keeping everything running, compatible, and so on. Risk landscape. I usually start with this, but I've put it here because I wanted to give you all of that earlier content first in this case. So there are a lot of risks. I've listed quite a bunch of them there. And these risks, you'll see only one of them is legal proceedings. The contract's often viewed as being there in case of legal proceedings. But I'd like you to reconsider your perspective on contracts as being a valuable tool for managing all of these other risks. And the value on the exit is the bonus. In fact, it's a risk if you don't cover off all of these risks, because your business won't grow as well. But also value on exit, if you have good contracts in place, your business is going to be worth more when you come to sell it. Okay? Here's a reasonably common perception of contracts. What's the contract for? It's in case I'm sued? Not really. It needs to lock that down as well as it can, but it's all of those everyday risks on the previous page. What's in scope, what's out of scope? What's my responsibility when reselling cybersecurity services? What can I do about my customers' behaviour? All of these things, if not taken care of, cause you revenue leakage. Okay? If your contract has got legal jargon in it, that's an issue. You need to be able to read it. Your customers need to be able to read it. It's your agreement, right? So make sure it's like that. If you don't understand your contracts, either learn what they mean so that you can explain, or preferably write them in a way or have them written in a way that actually makes sense to you. Clients trust us, not sufficient. We still meet with lots of MSPs and it's like a good old handshake because they trust us. Trust alone causes lots of problems. The complexity of what you're doing cannot be covered off in a handshake. This EBITDA global industry average comes from Pax8 as 6%, which I expect most of you are much higher than that, especially as you're in the peer groups and, very motivated. But that is where it sits. Even if yours is 2 or 3 times that, your revenue leakage, if you can curb that, reduce that revenue leakage, you can get a real uplift on your EBITDA and therefore on your business value. Some MSPs will say, oh, we don't have any of those sorts of problems. I've been in actual calls with MSPs with, oh, we don't have any of those sort of revenue leakage problems. 5 minutes later, actually, it's probably about 10,000 a month. Actually, 5 minutes later, it's about 200,000 a year. So if you think about areas of slippage, those grey areas that I talked about, it's not that you're trying to, charge your customers a whole lot more. It's just being realistic about defining the scope of your service, recognising when something is a project and not having that done as part of the managed service, even if it's a couple of hours. If you've got 10 engineers, doing even half an hour extra a week on that basis, that's soon going to add up. That's your leakage. That's one of your areas of leakage. Okay? There's lots of areas of leakage. Greater than 5%, I mean, a lot of people will soon say that's very conservative. Further reducing revenue leakage is around, you've got your contract, and as a business owner or people involved in sorting out the contracts, you know what's in there and that's signed up. But does your team understand? So it's like having this as an operational aspect of your business. Do your processes reflect what's in your agreements, and do your agreements reflect your processes? No point in writing something beautiful in your contract, but it's not actually what you do, okay? So the MSP that I spoke of earlier, with their engineers doing work out of scope at no additional charge, that's an issue of revenue leakage. That's an issue of their team not understanding that's actually not in scope. Don't do that. Don't be so helpful, Let's keep everything straight. And in fact, levelling up that playing field with your customer so they know that they're actually going to be charged for work. The same is true of onboarding. They come in. How many of you, that slides from sales to onboarding, where you're starting to do valuable work before there's any charge to the customer? What other profession does that? I think we've come to the end now. Oh no, we've just got this, which is an all-important slide. And I hope you've got a better appreciation now from what we've been talking about, that your risks can go down by having the right sorts of contracts and using them effectively. It's not just having them, it's using them effectively. Your revenue and your profitability going up, and the value of your business going up.
Thank you for sharing your expertise, and really appreciate your time and coming to the peer groups with us, and hope to see you at a future one.